Hello, I hope this vlog finds you doing well today. So like you, I'm feeling a bit worn and torn from the war on Israel. I've got the red alert on my phone and I stop and pray every time it goes off, and that means I'm praying day and night, because the Jewish people in Israel don't get to sleep. So I've chosen to partner with them and to be an intercessor. I felt like I should jump on here and try to answer the question, what is a Jew, or what is a Jewish person? And that is a loaded question, and one that I wish I was not stepping up to the plate to answer. There are plenty of really marvelous people out there that I listen to that talk about such things, but I understand that not everyone feels that they have access to those resources or knows where to look. But there's such crazy things being said out there about the fake Jews, and on that, I actually have unfollowed about 6 to 8 people recently because they were just solid believers saying some really wackadoo stuff about how they don't believe in replacement theology. Replacement theology is believing that the church replaces Israel. That they don't believe that, but the Jewish people, the people that live in the Middle East or live in Israel that say that they're Jewish today, are not necessarily Jewish. I mean, the things that people are saying are so bombastic. I'm half Irish, genetically speaking. I knew I had Irish heritage. I mean, I had been told that. My family celebrated St. Patrick's Day. There were some Irish jokes and stories passed down, but it wasn't something that my family took very seriously. A lot of people in America, their family doesn't take their ancestry or their heritage very seriously, and I'm not criticizing that or saying that's how it should be. This really is a melting pot, and in America, you could get someone that's very passionate about their Polish roots, or you get someone that says, I don't even really know what I am. I'm an American. But there are, because of God, Jewish people, genetically, they have the ancestry, they have the heritage, and many have the religion or the faith, that this Jewish tradition of culture and belief system has carried on throughout all the generations. And you have to ask yourself, how has this happened? Well, it's just more evidence that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is real. And he's been faithful to keep this people group alive as an expression of who he is and his faithfulness. And so I don't really understand why people want to take away from others' Jewishness, other than to say that it seems to be a demonic delusion that atheists, people that celebrate, or celebrate, that practice all different religions, but even Christians seem to be under this demonic delusion of having no understanding of why God has preserved this people group and this land. I was trying to do a Google search recently to find some videos that talked about, the truth of Israel. And almost right after they were put up, they were taken down. It was really interesting. I would do these Google searches, and then all of this pro-Palestinian stuff would come up. And unless you know exactly what you're looking for, and please try this, test me on it, please. I implore you, it'll open your eyes. Please do it. Maybe if I ask you more than once, you'll do it. Pro-Israeli stuff does not come up. It is not politically correct. It's not even necessarily religiously correct. So I was doing some research just to make sure that I give you the nuts and bolts correctly. So most people who want to make Aliyah, which is to get your citizenship to Israel, they do it through their mother's birth certificate, or through their mother, in that line. But what's interesting about that is that biblically, it was the father's lineage that made you considered Jewish. But the reason why Israel looks at the mother's lineage predominantly is because during World War II, when the Germans were trying to find who was and was not Jewish, it was very easy to track the mother's side, right? Because there were all of these certificates of live birth and such documents. A lot of the documents were kept in the Catholic Church. Remember, it was a very different time. And so that was easier to track. And so Israel has honored, and they've done this to be respectful, they've honored the guidelines that the Nazis imposed on the Jewish people, determining what made them Jewish. I am not going to give a percentage, though if you did some digging, you could find it. It's not very much that they considered making you Jewish. If they found a trace, they wanted to get rid of you. Or if it was just a little bit, they wanted you to denounce your Jewishness, and you would have to become a Nazi, and you would have to fight in the war. And it was just wild. If you were married to someone that was like half or full Jewish, yeah, I just hate talking like this, it's so demonic, but you would have to divorce them and disown your children. It was just so wild how the Nazis were so obsessed with ethnicity and DNA. And I find it quite concerning that this generation, unlike any time that I've experienced or read about since then, is literally obsessed with your DNA. And so I've got a lot of people saying, well, I came up Ashkenazi Jewish. I'm like, wow, cool. Why is it that predominantly Ashkenazi Jewish is the one that really seems to come up? Well, that's the genetic, these DNA tests, the Ancestry.com and 23andMe and all of that stuff. It's based on a pool of what they have, first of all. So Sephardic may come up, but there are 12 tribes. The other tribes have been watered down a lot more. And so it may not come up. So say you are, and we have in our family, Russian Jew. So it may just come up Russian. Okay. So you would only know that you were a Russian Jew if you had had that story passed down to you, or those traditions. I'm going to give you a lot of random information, and you do with it what you will. Okay. So to that point, being Jewish is an ethno-religion. Now, people debate about this. There are some Jewish people that I've known that really don't like that. And it offends them because they're like, well, that's what Hitler did. That's why he killed our people, because of our ethnicity. Well, we know spiritually it was because of their faith. But yes, both are true. But yes, it is an ethno-religion. And I believe that God made it that way because he wanted this people group to live and to survive. And so it had to be this way. And that's kind of something you just have to take up with God. So the Nazis were really into people's ethnicity. And they really wanted to create this Aryan race. Well, we once again are there, right? We are wanting to do this ethnic cleansing. So in Israel, like I said, to make Aliyah or get citizenship, you have to prove in some form or fashion with a rabbi letter. There's all these things that you have to do to prove that you're Jewish. Well, typically what they do is they say, do you have and then you just prove it, a Jewish grandparent. If you have one Jewish grandparent, then you can get citizenship to Israel. So we have how God says what makes you Jewish, and then we have what the world says and why the world says it. And so there were a lot of people during World War II that were rounded up and put in concentration camps that had converted to Christianity, some who didn't even know that they had Jewish ancestry at all. And yet there were documents that had been found, and it didn't matter that they were willing to denounce their Jewishness. They were rounded up and put in concentration camps. Some of them were even anti-Semitic. They had self-hatred. So it's really wild when you start digging into this, because it's not necessarily a black and white answer that I can give you. It is so nuanced. I'm just making sure that I don't miss anything. I'm glad I looked at my notes. I was going to make sure and recommend a man named Avner Bosky. I follow him on Instagram. He is a beautiful Jewish man who lives in Israel, and he has such solid teachings. If you want to Google David's Tent, he goes through historical, geography, biblical, about what makes you Jewish, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He talks about Israel. He talks about being Gentile. Really marvelous. And he does it extremely methodically, detailed. He's definitely a teacher, and he can just give you so much information that I just can't do. So there are people that don't have the paperwork to show that they're Jewish, and yet they just know that they're Jewish. And so the ultra religious in Israel are saying, okay, we'll prove it and do a DNA test. So some people are doing DNA tests. But that is problematic. And there are a lot of people in Israel that don't like that, because it's not giving you the full picture of what being Jewish is. And because all of these other tribes besides the Ashkenazi have really integrated into society other places. So you say, well, so then why do they even want to go to Israel? Well, that question is hard and simple at the same time. I'm going to give you the simple answer, and that would be because God says in these days that he would draw his people from the four corners of the earth, and they would have an inner desire to go back to the land of Israel, to go back to their Jewish homeland or their Jewish state, and to rebuild. You know, if you read about Nehemiah in the Bible, you can see that, you know, there is a rich history of God trying to reestablish a Jewish nation, a Jewish expression. And so that clearly is important to him. So one of the problems with these DNA tests is not only does it open us up to ethnically discriminating against people, but Ashkenazi is the main one showing up because this was such a tight-knit group of people. And I don't want to say that they were ultra-religious, but they kept their communities really tight, really small. And there was some, I'm not saying incest, but very close-knit marrying in their communities. And so that's why that DNA comes up so strong as being Jewish. And so I'm not criticizing that or saying that makes you more Jewish, but that's why that is so prevalent. But there's more than just your DNA that makes you Jewish, right? There is a heritage that's been passed on to you. So some people, you know, they maybe don't practice Judaism, but they know that their family is Jewish, and maybe they had a family member that survived the Holocaust. or certain traditions from their Jewish heritage were passed on to them, and that's really important to them, that get passed on through the generations. So that's another expression, right, of what we pass on to our families, our traditions, our beliefs, and what makes our family who our family is. And it would be like telling a German person, you can't live in Germany. You can't have a German country. That's what it is when we tell Jewish people they can't have a homeland. Now, I'm not saying Jewish people have to live in Israel, but I'm saying they certainly should have a homeland. And we should be honored when they live amongst us. So Sephardic also shows up sometimes. And then, like I said, we know that scripture says there were 12 tribes. Another thing I want to say, besides just saying that there were 12 tribes and that there's an expression of Jewishness, multicultural, multiracial, all across the earth, right? I said in my last video, we know at the Tower of Babel, we were dispersed. So being Jewish is more than just being Middle Eastern, though, that is probably what most people think of when they think of being Jewish. God he's so interesting in the way that he does things. And I'm not sure why we're questioning him. I just feel really sad that we honestly have to talk about this. My heart is that I don't even really want to do this vlog. I just can't really believe that this is where we're at in the world, that we have to talk about what makes you Jewish. But, I'm looking at the news and every day I see new anti-Semitic hate crimes. And just yesterday I was downtown and they had an anti-Israel, it was a peaceful stand-in, but it made me really sad. And of course, people are allowed to not like Israel, but to not like Israel is to really not like Jewish people. And it's just unlike any discrimination I've ever heard of before. Here the Jewish people in Israel are being rocketed, beheaded, set on fire, kidnapped, raped, tortured, bombed. And they've been living this way for 2 weeks and who knows how long, and yet we gaslight them, and on top of what's happening to them, we criticize them. It's the ultimate gaslighting, and that's why I say this really is a demonic delusion. This is from the pit of hell. The enemy clearly is raging against God, and this is how he's manifesting himself. I don't know if you all have heard of Douglas Murray. I really like him. Some of you might be off put by him if you know who he is. I would Google him if you're more open-minded. I hate all these identifiers, but I know this is just where we're at culturally right now. But he is a Caucasian male who is homosexual, and he says he's an atheist. But this is what's really interesting. He says that he is a Christian atheist. And when I first heard that, okay, don't turn this off. When I first heard that, my nephew Micah sent me a video. I went, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And I would imagine that's what you're thinking too. But I started listening to some of his videos, and he didn't mean Christian in that I believe that Jesus is God and I necessarily pray and have a relationship with God. But what he meant was, Americans and Europeans, we're mostly Christian nations. That's what our working civilization, and our civilizations are working. They're more functional than other civilizations. They work because of the Christian values that have been handed down to us. And so he said that just like it's disrespectful when you say a Jewish person, so many Jewish people who are ethnically Jewish or have the heritage of being Jewish but don't necessarily honor Judaism, they still say, like, I'm Jewish. He said, why can't we say I'm Christian? And he's very pro-Zionist. He said, because it works. And I'm just not even doing him a service. He's so smart. But there's something there. And this is a Judeo-Christian nation. And that is why this nation works. And having the 10 commandments and these infrastructures that our faith is totally encompassed by, it makes a difference. You can look around the world and see what you're doing isn't working. And I know that that's not a popular idea to people that are left leaning, but this isn't working. You can try to recreate the wheel, but the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And our civilization is cracking, and we're leaking. We're leaking here. The seams are leaking. So it really is a miracle that there even still are Jewish people, because every generation has some kind of story of ethnic cleansing towards the Jewish people. You can look at the Spanish Inquisition. I mean, just go all through history and you will see the church, Martin Luther. Nobody likes Jewish people. It just doesn't seem to matter where you land. But then you read about people like Corrie ten Boom, who was a professing Christian, but during World War II, she said, that she wouldn't lie. And she said, your people are my people, just like Ruth said to Naomi. And, she went into the concentration camp with the Jewish people. There were Christians that put the Jewish star on. And they said, your fate is my fate. So the Jewish people, they kept Torah, and they kept their heritage alive to keep the God of Israel alive. Would he die? Otherwise, no. But his expression on this earth. Okay? So don't be too nitpicky. So I wasn't planning on saying this, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this in. So my husband and I went to Poland, and that was, you're going to think this is funny, but that was actually on my bucket list. I wanted to go to Auschwitz, and because I'm a big World War II Holocaust buff. That's one of my main hobbies. And when we went, we were shocked by how little Jewish you had to be put in a concentration camp. And as we were looking at documents in the Hall of Records and listening to people's stories, it really struck us. Wow. So, gosh, the enemy's really going to and fro. I mean, he could just round up anybody he wants. And I say that to you to say, don't worry about whether or not you're Jewish. You'll know if you're Jewish, okay? But I want to say that first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. And so we see what's happening in Israel. There is a reckoning coming for Christians as well. Because if the enemy hates Jewish people, I can tell you, he hates you too. Because we also worship the Jewish Messiah. And he wants the remnant. He wants those of us that are waiting on God and that are his expression on this earth of love, and that are looking for him, and that are waiting for him, and that believe in him, and that are blessing the Jewish people, and that are being unoffended. The enemy hates that. He hates us. And I don't think we need to be afraid, but I do think we need to be aware. And I went from being so angry and upset and concerned about the state of the world, the lack of discernment. I'm sure you felt that in my last video. To now I'm just so grieved. I'm looking around me and I'm seeing some beautiful people. I've been on some intercessory streams and worship streams, and they've just been awesome people all over the world. There's so many people that love Israel, but also so many people who profess to be Christians. And I'm like, how can, and they hate Jewish people and they hate Israel. And I'm like, well, can you really be a Christian and hate Jewish people? Because Jesus is Jewish. Like, I don't know. I'm asking you that question. And I heard somebody say, you know, if you go to church and they're not talking about what's going on in Israel, get out of there. And the church that we go to sometimes, they've been talking about it. It's imperfect, but people are imperfect, but they're talking about it. So I said, yeah, that's really good. But I leave that with you. If you're going somewhere and they're not talking about this stuff, or they're talking like the church replaces Israel, or they don't like Jewish people, if they're not interested in helping, that's a red flag, friend. It's a red flag. In this hour, I just can't see being intimate with anybody that's got that kind of ideology. I'm not saying hate them, isolate from them, but wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove. And in these days, we really do need to make sure that we're having discernment. We need to make sure we're keeping good company. Bad company corrupts good morals. And we need to surround ourselves with people that are being really humble before God and really being humble with their approach towards these really delicate issues. But I'm not sure that the time of being polite about this is going to last too much longer, because the enemy's not being polite. You're going to have to choose which side you stand on. And I know as believers, especially in this day, we don't like sides, but there are sides. Like, are you standing with God or are you standing against God? And if you're standing against his people and his land, I'm not really sure that you can be standing with God. And that's why I said, I believe this is a demonic delusion. And so if you've been struggling, or people around you have been struggling with this whole fake Jew thing, what makes you a Jew? There's no longer Jew and Gentile. The church replaces Israel. If you find yourself starting to be, or the people around you, obsessed with ethnicity and religion and having a lot of confusion, there's a lot of confusion right now. There's some identity issues. Hunker down. Make sure you're solid in your identity. So, okay, I'm going to use myself as an example, okay? So I know what my ethnicity is. I know what my heritage is. Those are things that are interesting. I find them very interesting. But those are not things that were really important to either side of my family. My family was proud to be American. That was the main thing that we talked about. We weren't big into talking about the color of our skin and all of those things. And I was taught that, you know, people were judged by the content of their character. My mom was really progressive in a good way when it comes to things like that. Shout out to you, Mom. So I just saw myself as a person, and I saw people as people. But along the way, nugget after nugget, God was showing me, your heritage is grafted into a Jewish root. No, I'm not Jewish, but I am a part of a Jewish family. And I've become a Hebrew. Hebrew means to cross over. So I am Gentile, right? I'm Irish and all of those fun European descents. I'm an Caucasian American woman who doesn't necessarily have a rich heritage outside of my biblical heritage. And I have integrated that into my life, and it is completely authentic. No, I've not converted to Judaism, which people can do and are considered Jewish. Is in Israel, a Gentile can convert to Judaism and apply for citizenship. I don't know how God sees that. I don't see a scripture that specifically talks about that, but that's an interesting question. But again, we get so wrapped up in DNA. I think at the core, when we get quiet, we really know what our identity is. But where do you get your identity? You get your identity from Him. And yes, there's an identity crisis. You know what? Okay, there's a teaching called Identity Crisis. Oh shoot. I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Identity Crisis. It's on YouTube. One of the best teachings I ever listened to. I listened to it years ago. It really breaks a lot of these confusions down. You won't regret watching it. It's long. It's like 3 hours. Watch it. Jim Staley, Passion for Truth Ministries, Identity Crisis. Watch it. One of the best teachings I ever watched. Gave a lot of language. Better at doing that than I am. He's a solid teacher. So anyway, so I get my identity from God. And so I've taught my children in their heritage. And they've gotten to have that their whole life, because I really went deep with God to find out who He says I am. What heritage do you want me to pass on? And so each one of my children has been invited to be a Hebrew and to cross over. So that's who I am. That's who they are. So now you go figure out who you are. But if you are one of my Gentile friends, and this question is making you so much want to say, okay, I'm 1% Ashkenazi, and so maybe I'm Jewish. Cool, you have Ashkenazi. That's literally awesome. Like, it legitimately is. But unless God's highlighting that, I would say as a Gentile, do your job as a Gentile. Help your Jewish brothers and sisters get to go see the land, get to go live in the land, make Aliyah. Meet the needs of the underground church there. Build the kingdom that God wants to build in Israel with your money, with your resources. Maybe it's not about you getting to have your vacation, though I think it's awesome if everybody at least goes to Israel one time, not because you have to, but as a believer, it puts the whole Bible into perspective, and there's something spiritual that happens. So I talked a lot longer than I thought I was going to, and I know I wasn't super methodical, but you know, when you're a little sad, sometimes you just don't make as much sense. But I feel like I was faithful and obedient. I made this vlog. If you don't like it, well, that's okay. I'm trying to answer the questions that you all are asking me, and to be faithful with this little posse that is following me on here. So I do hope you have a good rest of your day. My son just got home from work, so I'm going to go in and do my little daily check-in. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.